Here we go today, wrapping up our 14-week journey with the campfire stories and the cornerstones we've discovered within those stories. I want to begin by just reminding us about the importance of the concept of a cornerstone. I've had two experiences with that. One was when I was a young adult going to college. The back porch on the house where we lived for several years started being separated from the house itself. And so Dad asked me if I'd be willing to do that for a few bucks. And so I didn't know for sure what I was doing, but I accepted his invitation. And then he told me to begin that by building a new foundation. And so I jacked up the back porch and was going to build a new foundation. And he said, now be sure that there's a cornerstone. And he explained to me the importance of not to start with the porch foundation next to the house, to start with the cornerstone away from the house and then build the foundation back into the house. And the importance of the cornerstone was sort of that anchor of structural integrity. And then when you started laying the cement blocks to work out from the corner both ways. Now, how did my dad, who was a school teacher, know about that? Well, his father was a mason, immigrated from Scotland, and from 1905 to 1928 laid all kinds of foundations in the city of Winfield. But Dad learned the importance of the placement of the cornerstone and where to start a building. The other experience I had was out in western Kansas when Karen and I were living in Ransom, and one of the big contests every year on the football field was Quinter and Ransom. And we went up to Quinter one night and it was blowing, no exaggeration, 50 miles an hour. And that's not unusual for that area. It's that wind belt in western Kansas. And suddenly, sometime during the first part of the game, an explosion occurred, a loud sound. It stopped the game and dust covered the field and all the fans. And so everybody wondered what happened. We assumed a gas explosion of some kind. But then we realized that they were building a new gymnasium at Quinter. And they had built one wall of the gymnasium. And they had put reinforcement lumber on one side of the wall to protect it from the wind. But that wall, 30 feet high, was nearly finished, and the wind caused it to collapse. Why? Because the builder had not used the concept of the cornerstone and laying that cornerstone in place and then building out both ways from the cornerstone at a right angle would have given even that wall the structural integrity to withstand the wind. But because all they built was a wall for one side of the building, knowing they could get there Monday morning and put the other wall up. But a wall by itself, without the principle of the cornerstone, fell to the wind. You see, a single wall has no structural integrity. You see, cornerstones are the starting point and give structural integrity to buildings, but also to cultures, to nations, to family units. And as we complete our 14-week journey exploring the cornerstones that come out of the campfire stories of the Hebrew people, I want to just explore how these cornerstones are applicable to our life together in 2021. And I've selected 4 realities in our culture to illustrate the relevance of the cornerstones. The first one we'll look at is racism, then sexism, then environmental ruin, and then prevailing despair. So let's begin with racism. Built into our social fabric of our culture in the United States is the understanding that a race is genetically superior to other races, which issues in vertical vision the ability to look down upon others. Now, the agonizing reality of racism for me is that I grew up with a father who was first befriended as a young immigrant kid from Scotland wearing kilts, a skirt. He was first befriended by a black child who became his first and only friend for a long time. And then later, my parents purchased a house in 1722 South Mosley in Wichita. Been on the market for a long time, and they kept lowering the price. And Dad and Mom found it, and they said, we'll buy that house. But nobody else wanted that house. Why? Because there was a black woman that lived next door, and no one wanted to live next to a black woman. It was no issue for my parents. And so here I grew up with the lack of vertical vision, and I grew up with no thought of genetic superiority, but I have to realize how greatly in life I have benefited from living in a society governed and led by racist attitudes, racist laws, and racist cultural practices, because I'm Anglo. Indeed, I benefited from white racism. You see, racism is alive and well in our culture, and it's my conviction that the roots of racism must be countered with some of the cornerstones that we've discovered. How about the cornerstone that humans, all humans, are created in the image of God? How about the cornerstone that humanity is their brother's keeper? How about pride is the ultimate denial of the image of God in our lives? And how about the cornerstone that pride divides humankind, but Imago Dei, understanding, unites humankind? Now, you will have before you in the church school a list of these cornerstones. And I'm going to ask Charles to take a picture of this list at the end of our video so you can see it before you receive it on Sunday for discussion. But I've just listed 4 of those as, in my opinion, only as we hammer away at the roots of racism do we have a chance of becoming a culture that in all human beings we experience the image of God, that all are equal. These are the words of our Constitution, but not our way of life. Racism is alive and well, and our cornerstones of the Campfire stories are applicable to fight racism. But secondly, sexism. It's founded on the principle that males are superior to females because Males were the first order of creation. Human sexuality in the United States has become a playground of control for men and seduction for women. As a consequence, human sexuality has become a process of exploitation, which has, for both genders, issued in the experience of anxiety and guilt. Anxiety that one will not be who one is supposed to be sexually, and guilt that one is not measured up to be who one is supposed to be sexually. For males, power and control. For women, attractive and submissive. This is sexism in our culture. It is my conviction that only as we hammer away at the roots of sexism will we experience the beauty of human sexuality as the desire for interpersonal intimacy rather than interpersonal distance that is the result of anxiety and guilt. Listen to a couple of the Campfire cornerstones. Indeed, as we looked at in racism, humans, all humans, male and female, are created in the image of God. And then the cornerstone that the desire for sexual intimacy is good without shame. Racism, sexism. How about environmental devastation? All it takes is to open our eyes and observe to be convinced of the environmental ruin in our world and our culture. Observe the islands of plastic in the Pacific Ocean. Observe atmospheric changes resulting from emissions that are the consequence of the Industrial Revolution that made us rich. Observe the history of the deforestation of Haiti by furniture makers in Europe who wanted all that valuable wood to make furniture to be sold throughout the world and made a lot of people rich, but stripped Haiti of the only natural resource it had to survive as a people. And indeed, looked at the deforestation of the Amazon forest that is raising the question whether the earth might become uninhabitable for human life because of the deforestation of the Amazon and other great forests in the world. All we have to do is observe. Don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure it out. We don't have to study anything. Just observe and see the environmental ruin. And is there any other good place to start in response to this ruin than the cornerstone of the Campfire stories? How about from the first story of creation? Humanity is responsible for the care and protection of all creation. It's our job. Or humanity left to their own resources can destroy the created order. A couple relevant cornerstones to the observation of environmental ruin among us. But finally, the attitude of prevailing despair. For more and more persons, more and more nations, more and more families, more and more cultures, despair has become the prevailing attitude. For quite some time, despair has been the prevailing attitude among the permanently poor, economically, those who are without any hope of ever being other than without. That's what the permanently poor are all about. Now the permanently poor are becoming almost a majority of the world's population. And this group is increasing at a rapid rate in the United States. Despair is a spiritual issue that permeates the very being of individuals, families, cultures, and nations. For without hope, life withers away. It is my conviction that despair can only be addressed by those committed to hammering out justice all over this land. For think of the campfire stories. At the end of the storm, great is God's faithfulness. And indeed, pride divides humankind, but remember the last cornerstone concludes with the word Imago Dei unites humankind for the source of hope, not despair. The source of hope is God, the God of love. So I offer you the 12 cornerstones, not because they were relevant to the Hebrew culture of old, but because I believe they are the cornerstones for the Judeo-Christian culture throughout the centuries and must be cherished today and applied to our world. So for your thinking and discussion on Sunday morning, I offer some questions. First of all, what are other conditions in our life together that must be addressed by these cornerstones? Secondly, what are the competing cornerstones over against the campfire cornerstones that prevail in our culture today? And finally, can the campfire cornerstones survive in a secular society? Think on these things and enjoy the conversation Sunday. Thank you for listening.